Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. This is part 2 of our 2-part series on the Indigenous contribution to EcoPsychology with Dr. Glenn Aparicio Parry, who is the author of Original Thinking, a radical revisioning of time, humanity, and nature. Welcome again, Glenn.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Glad to be back.
I'm glad to be with you. You spent a lot of time working with Native American elders and got to know some of them very well, participated with them in ritual activity. And it's in the context of ritual activity, I think, that some of the deepest learning took place for you.
Oh, indeed. Indeed. I mean, ceremonies are very, very special opportunities to see the world in a completely different way. And I've been very, very blessed. I think one of the most amazing things that ever happened was the first time I was invited to do ceremony with the Canyoncito band of Navajo, or Grandfather Leon Secatero's tribe.
Yes.
You know, and it takes a long time to get there. When we get there, we clean the hogan, the sacred hogan. It's not a building, but it's, you know, where we set up camp. We walk into it sunwise, and we tell stories there, and we sing songs late into the night, and all the time we're attending the ceremonial fire. But this first time, you know, I was asked in the late part of the evening to tend the ceremonial fire. And I'd never done that before. And I learned that evening how to do it, how to build a relationship with the fire, and give the fire tobacco, give the fire sage. If the fire's hungry, give it food. If the fire's sleepy, maybe a little coffee. You build a relationship with the fire as a living being. And I did that. And it was late in the night, and everybody started to go back to their tent to go to sleep. And I did too, which was probably a mistake.
You had an opportunity to spend the whole night with the sacred fire, and you went to sleep. You abandoned your task.
Actually, there's a long story behind that why. But see, normally Grandfather Leon sleeps there. Later on, I ended up sleeping in that sacred place. But this time, Grandfather Leon wasn't there. I didn't even know that then. But that's probably why, you know. But I went to the tent to go to sleep. And I thought Grandfather Leon was going to tend the ceremonial fire. But then in the middle of the night, you know, I hear Grandfather Leon's beautiful, soft, mellifluous voice talking in my ear, and he just says, "Glenn, get up and tend the fire." But he wasn't there. It's just his voice. And it's very cold out there, so all I had to do, I was already sleeping in all my clothes, so I just had to put on my shoes, you know, get up, and the first thing I did is I fell down. I literally fell down when I got out of the tent because I looked up at the stars and it knocked me over. I was completely floored by the stars, which are always strong in New Mexico, but out here, you know, somewhere near Mount Taylor, out in the middle of nowhere, as you would say in Western lingo, it was, it really truly is.
Without the city lights.
No city lights for hundreds of miles almost. So it was so bright. So I used those starlight to move toward the fire, which was off in the distance now, but that's all I needed. I never use a flashlight. There's plenty of light from the sky. And I walked toward the fire, and sure enough, when I got there, it was almost out. It was very dim. And so I built that fire up into a roaring blaze. And then I made my second mistake. I went back to sleep again. Talk about going to sleep in a Gurdjieffian sense, you know. I went back to sleep. And then The next thing I heard, which was, "Coffee, coffee, you're burning daylight." Our human coyote had awakened us. And it was really early and still really, really cold. I mean, Venus had come up by then. I mean, the first time, no. But Venus was up, but it was still really maybe 2.5 hours before sunrise. But we went to the fire, and the women indeed started making some coffee, which takes about 45 minutes over a fire. And then the men were chanting, "Hojonas li, Hojonas li, Hojonas li." They were chanting in Navajo for 2.5 hours until that sun rose. And when that sun rose, Jeff, I felt it in my solar plexus. I knew, I understood that the sun that was coming up over the horizon was the same sun as in my solar plexus. And it's the same sun as that central fire. And it's the same sun as all the lights in the sky. It all clicked, and I realized that is, it's light. Light is the source of consciousness. That's the first thing.
Well, you know, you've just reminded me the very name, solar plexus.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, it's true. It's true, you know. And so here's the thing, though. Then after the sun rose, Grandfather Leon comes back in a camp. That's the first time I found out that he wasn't in camp to whisper in my ear or to even observe the fire and somehow project his consciousness to whisper in my ear. I started to wonder, how did he do that? Why wasn't he in camp? He wasn't in camp because people were lost, and he somehow got a message, not a cell phone or a text message, but a psychic message that people were lost, and he went to get them. He had to figure out where they were. He got them, and then he brought them back in. So he wasn't there when that was going on with the fire. So I thought he must have bilocated his consciousness and observed the dimming fire.
Since you heard him speak so clearly.
It was totally his voice. It was totally his voice. I assumed it was him. And so we went out to do, as we do when we go there for 4 days. We're going to sacred sites and making offerings. And we did that, and along the pathway I had an opportunity to go next to Leon, and I thought I'd ask him. I said, "Leon, how did you speak to me in my ear last night?" But he didn't answer. Like a lot of native elders, they don't answer if you're asking the wrong question. But really the message he gave me without speaking was, it's not important to try to explain this. Just be here, just enjoy the presence, enjoy the moment, pray. That's our purpose, is to pray for humanity and all our relations, So that's what I did. But then later on, Leon's eldest son, Orlando Secatero, offered a different explanation. And he said, "Glenn, that wasn't Leon speaking into your ear. That was the fire speaking into your ear, disguising its voice as Leon, so you would listen."
What did you think of that?
I thought it was one of the most profound things I ever heard of. To me, it resonated immediately, and I said, wow. And it's changed my life, because I started to look for the origin, the true origin of my consciousness. I started to become a little bit more aware of what was happening in my environment and what was causing me to think in certain ways. And I began to see the world a little bit, I'm still, I was raised in New York City, and I have this kind of background that's somewhat westernized, but I started to change. I think, truthfully, always I had an idea that our thoughts were not our thoughts in the way that we conceive them. We're vessels, and we are emanating a certain vibration, and we attract certain energy to us. I used to think that, but the difference was, now I thought of it more directly as from the elements, from the light. I thought of it as consciousness. And it reminded me later on, we were doing a dialogue, and Nancy Maryboy, also Navajo, she spoke about Tsuyo, And that's the original light of our consciousness, the source of our consciousness as the starlight that comes to us. And it's the place from whence we came. It's our ancestors. And actually, she talked about it in a way that was so beautiful because it didn't deny a Western way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And Brian Swim was there that year, the mathematical cosmologist who Nancy had a friendly relationship with. So she didn't disagree with Brian, who said that this light comes from the past, but it's also here in the present. It is what I'm talking about with original thinking. It seamlessly ties together the new and old because it's both.
Now, a skeptical person,
sure,
such as myself, from time to time,
right,
might say, well, what about your own subconscious? It couldn't have been that you knew subconsciously that the fire needed tending, and so your subconscious created this voice to remind you to wake up. And
well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. I don't want to rule it out, but I don't think it's true. I mean, I think that I believe that the fire really spoke to me directly. I tend to think of like this. I tend to think of the subconscious as nature, that all our thoughts come from nature. But maybe the subconscious is a kind of a filter, maybe our language or biases or our preconceptions or something. And it's really beautiful when nature goes right through that filter and it doesn't stop anything. And I think that's what I experienced. I think
when you experienced that sense of oneness with the fire and the sun.
Yeah, I had already experienced. I experienced the oneness. I think and that's why fire was able to connect. I've had amazing things happen out there at that site. I mean, I've seen gigantic figures in the sky, which almost reminded me of when I was a college student. I took certain substances, like LSD, but I wasn't taking that there. And yet I saw this gigantic figures in the sky of a man and a woman. And I feel it was maybe the holy people revealing themselves, what the Navajo said, the holy ones, the original spirit people revealing themselves to me. I don't know, I can't be sure, but
it was a visionary experience.
So things happen there. Things happen there. It's a veil between the worlds. In fact, I could go on and on about what's happened there, but that we would have to tape for a few hours.
Well, what we're getting at here is very crucial because it has to do with our connection to what you could call sacred reality.
Yeah. I think that our languages and our way of rational thinking, the way we've elevated rational discourse, does end up separating ourselves from what's really happening, what's really unfolding. And there's nothing wrong with rational thought. I don't want to be seen as somebody attacking that, but remember where it came from. For the ancient Greeks, rational came from ratio. It was about a relationship between things. So that's why the ancient Greeks spoke about rational thought, not just as the pinnacle of thought, but as the most beautiful form of thought yet to arise. It was about the relationship between things in divine proportion, sacred ratio. That's what the Greeks were talking about. That's what I think we need to recover.
Well, it does seem as if indigenous people everywhere regard both themselves and the world as sacred. Would you agree?
Yeah, and there isn't this divider between the world. What Leroy Little Bear talked about in Blackfoot, there was no really word for I or ego. Now maybe now there kind of is because they've had 500 years of contact, so you can't imagine. But certainly originally there wasn't. A human being was really just part of the flux, So things kind of like move around us. Just like, think of us as almost like a stone thrown in the water, except that we've got a lot of energies, but there's permutations, ripples that come around us. We create an energy field, but we are not so important. We're not, it's not our ego creating the world. even the thought in quantum physics today, I think, is a little bit off when we're talking about our thought being necessary to create something.
Oh yes, the role of the observer in collapsing the wave function.
Yeah, I'm not. I think that's a little bit of a function of our over-rational mind, even to postulate that.
Well, if you think of the observer as the ego, I suppose that becomes a problem. If one thinks of the observer in a larger sense, that you're
a sacred
speaking,
witness,
something of that sort. When we talk about eco-psychology, the basic premise is that if we're going to resolve these terrible crises that the planet is facing, if we could list them, maybe a dozen different danger points created by human activity, if we're going to move past all of that, we have to see ourselves in a new way. We have to have a new psychology.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Let's name one disaster, because we don't want to get sidetracked. But look at how fast the rainforest is being cut down at a rate of 150 acres a minute. Okay, that is insane. So why is that happening? It's happening because somebody's made a decision that they want money instead of trees. Okay, now, or they're going to turn trees into money. It becomes an economic product in some way, or they will be replaced with agriculture, God knows why. But we wouldn't be doing that if we were realizing that we couldn't even breathe without the trees. What the indigenous people have been telling us for a long time, that the rainforest are the lungs of Mother Earth. I pray every morning, to the trees, and I'm thankful that the trees give out the breath of life that I can give back to them in a sacred circle. That's a beautiful thing. I mean, I don't think there's a human being on this planet who isn't emotionally affected or connected to trees.
Well, many people take trees for granted.
You think so?
Well, Ronald Reagan once said, if you've seen one redwood, you've seen them all.
Oh, no. Yeah, he took down the solar panels on the White House, too, right? Yeah.
So, this is not a political discussion.
I understand.
But the point is simply that the psychology of many people today, where they feel separate from nature, is ultimately what seems to be causing so many problems.
It really does. And it is very possible to reconnect and remember, restore. I don't think I've found a word yet that I don't love, by the way. So because there is no first thing. That's why I don't like linear thought. That's always like new. The words are the ones that are healing, the remembering, the restoring, if you want to use that. It's our reconnection to what's always been there, that's always been the source of our consciousness, the source of our healing, the source of our joy, too, is nature.
And the truth is, and scholars have known this for many decades, modern people in the Western world are often alienated from their own source.
Yeah, that's why we become unhappy. That's why we can become violent. I mean, people have known this for a very long time. I mean, remember the South Bronx of Manhattan, or not Manhattan, that doesn't make sense. The South Bronx of New York City is what I meant to say. That, when it was in its worst period, it's because they had just put all these, this low-income housing and with no trees. Just planting trees around there changed the vibration, and it became a little bit better place to live. I'm not saying it's the ideal place to live, but it's gotten better, and it's always a good thing to plant trees. I mean, I think people feel, even the Ronald Reagans who may say that they've seen one redwood, they've seen them all, I think he still actually feels good when he's hanging out in the redwoods.
I would imagine.
I'm imagining, yes, I understand.
But the key, it seems to me, begins with education. Maybe even before, maybe even at an earlier age, but at a very young age, we we must be doing things to teach young people, and they need to develop their egos when they're young, but do they need to retain this sense of separateness?
Well, when I wrote Original Thinking, my love was education. I started out to write a book called Original Education. It turned out that the first 3 parts of the book are really the foundation for education. So what I really came to a realization of was that education happened long before there were schools.
Yes, indeed.
The real origin of education, if you go deep, is always relevant. Education was about interacting with your environment, but it's only after we made knowledge into such an abstraction that education mirrored that. And that's the process education's been going through. So, 300 years ago, there were just 3 subjects in the world, really: biology, theology, and physics. And 200 years ago, we started to get, more subjects, but most of them only happened in the last 100 years, and it's all a mirror of the fact that we started to have more fragmented consciousness, more abstraction, and we began to believe that that was the way to go, and it ends up making education not relevant.
And each discipline has its own methodologies, and very, very often this notion of connecting with source which is so important to indigenous thought, is lacking in our educational system.
Absolutely. Of course, you're a wonderful exception to that, getting your doctorate in parapsychology.
I have an interdisciplinary doctoral diploma in parapsychology. It's the only one ever been granted by an accredited university anywhere in the world, so I'm pretty lonely.
Don't be lonely. You're studying the paranormal, or you have been. Now you're interviewing the paranormal.
The paranormal.
I parry all normalcy. Go ahead,
the
sorry.
2 of us can form a paranormal society.
It's fine with me. Okay.
But then we would be lonely too, because the world at large doesn't necessarily see things the way you've been describing.
Well, let's look at the concept about the loneliness. I mean, that's probably why. I also know somebody who had an unusual degree, Ryan Damaris, who had the only person that got a degree in interspecies communication or something. I think, it was from Union Institute. And then Union Institute stopped doing that because she would be the only one. She didn't create a field.
Right.
And that actually makes some sense, But what really makes sense to me is that we allow students to follow their passion. Follow their inquiry wherever it goes. And let's not be so worried about whether their degree is what bin to put it in. I mean, if they could just, if they can submit a really valid topic of inquiry, let's say they want to figure out how to save the rainforest. That doesn't have to be only ecology. We now, as we've been discussing, that could also be psychology or eco-psychology, or it could be so many things, because the world is interconnected in that way. Let them follow their inquiry. Let them follow it where it leads them. Let them gather information in the old ways. Let them just look at the way we used to look in the world. We called the people not scientists, but natural philosophers. They just look for the pattern integrity in nature. That's what I'm interested in. That's what we do at the Circle for Original Thinking. We do holistic science, and we've partnered with the Holistic Science Journal in the UK to do that, and we love it. That's what it's about.
Well, you're planting a seed.
Thank you.
And as the former director of the Seed Institute, that would be natural. That would be important. And yet, given the urgency of the situation, do you feel that a seed is enough?
Well, it's very interesting that you say that. I think that a seed is the ultimate symbol of possibility. But we have to go beyond planting seeds. We have to actually engage people in ways to interact with the living earth. You know, and that's where the secret will come. I mean, I think there would be a tremendous shift if everyone could remember that the elements are alive, that the fire, the air, the water, and earth are alive. But beyond that, let's interact with them. You know, one of the things that indigenous peoples do, it's very simple, is make offerings. You don't pray, and I don't know any indigenous person that would pray asking for something without offering something. And that goes to the heart of it's a relationship. You know, in modern times we make fun of the ancients that made sacrifices. Okay, so the word sacrifice has become very much out of favor. And it's poo-pooed as this, you know, this primitive culture that, you know, kills virgins or something. But the actual origin of that was really to make an offering. So an offering is clearly a very good thing, a way of interacting, and you'll find, or I've found anyway, I can't speak for everyone, that it comes back to you.
Because the universe is alive.
Yes, it is.
Glenn Aparicio Parry, thank you so much for this very paranormal conversation. It's been a joy.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thank you for being with us.